All right, welcome everybody. We've got our AMA today on anything Databricks. I'm your host, Susie, and we have Shannon Lowder here to answer your questions. If you have been following us, Shannon's been in quite a few of our events. Shannon's one of our solution architects here at Blueprint. He's also a Databricks champion. So he is in Databricks every day, maybe even on the weekends as well, in addition. He also is heads down on a lot of our client work, which is why it's so great he's joining us today. He's got a wealth of knowledge from across multiple industries. I don't think he has seen a tech issue that he couldn't solve, but he also understands that business initiatives vary per industry, but the tech really doesn't. And that is why we want to help enable you to leverage Databricks more, because we do believe you can do more when you have more available to you. We had registrations come in who submitted questions. So we have several questions that Shannon's going to kick off this event with. However, for those who are joining us today, please be sure to answer or to add your questions to our comment section, and Shannon will be answering that in this event. So don't hold back. Please be sure to add your questions. I'll hand it over to you, Shannon.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for the intro. Trust me, I have had problems that I wasn't able to solve right away, but yeah, I stick with it like a bulldog until I can come up with something that'll work. So, all right. Question 1. What are the challenges and solutions for integrating Databricks with existing legacy data ecosystems? So you can see I went ahead and broke this down left and right. The top challenges that I see and solutions that can help overcome those problems. Number 1, whenever you're adding some new technology to the stack, you've always got to understand which tool is right for the workload that you're trying to perform. So a lot of customers start out with some transactional system like SQL Server or Oracle or something like that. If the workload is high volume insert, update, delete all at the same time, you really need something transactional like SQL Server or Oracle. While you could use Databricks to do a lot of that work, I'm sure you've heard that Delta Lake is transactionally or ACID compliant. That's only true for one table at a time. So if you've got a transaction that has to update a parent table, then a child table, and then commit it all or roll it all back, it's not easy to do that with Databricks. The transactional systems, they're custom built for this job, this type of workload. When you start thinking about caching, you've got some data that you want to keep around for a while. Maybe it's reporting data, and instead of every user having to run the same query to get the same result, maybe you cache that and everyone hits the cache instead of hitting the originating system. Well, in this case, yeah, it could be SQL Server. Yeah, it could be Databricks, but it could also be things like Cosmos DB in Azure or Redis or CouchDB or some kind of caching solution. So it's important to keep up with what's the workload actually doing. Now, when we start talking about analytic workloads, yeah, you can do that in SQL Server, and I spent more than half of my career supporting analytics in SQL Server, Oracle, and that's great. But we always get to that point where you wish you could just throw more CPU and more memory at the problem. Now, if you're at that point now in your analytics, I'm going to start talking to you about Databricks or some kind of massively parallel compute solution, because the only way you're going to be able to throw more processors at it really is some kind of Hadoop-like solution. I mean, using commodity hardware to add more and more compute, more and more memory to the problem. It's pretty much the way you got to go. So in this case, yeah, Databricks, absolutely the right tool. After that, we want to start talking about machine learning, AI type workloads. So again, incredibly compute intensive, incredibly memory intensive, long run times. Again, we're going to probably talk about some massively parallel compute solution like Databricks. It's just going to be a lot easier than trying to roll your own solution. So you see on the left the challenges here and choosing the right tool for your workload. The solution, you got to do research. You've got to test things. Anytime you read up on any one platform, you're going to read a lot of marketing speak, no doubt about it. So take what you learn with a grain of salt, spend some time doing proof of concept. See, is this tool the right for this given right for us for this given workload? So uh, the next biggest challenge I see is a lot of times with clients maintaining control, and this is everything from access controls, quality, cost, and scalability controls. It's all that. Now, when we start talking about Databricks, Unity Catalog is the way that you can set up your access control lists. Doesn't do a whole lot for quality yet. Nothing to do with cost, performance, or scaling. But its boundaries are pretty much Databricks and your external catalogs. So if you define a connection to a SQL server, yes, you can set up access controls of who can see that, who can use it. But there's that really hard boundary around your Databricks instance. So if we look at the right column, you'll notice that I'm talking about Purview here. Purview is a more complete solution for your whole data ecosystem. So rather than just logging some information about individual databases that you're going to have access to, now we can actually talk about the database server itself, all of the databases, who has access to all the databases, Cosmos DB. I mean, you can now notate more than just your Databricks instance. So depends on how much control you need as to what you're going to use. I've also listed a couple solutions for the sub-bullets here. When dealing with access control lists, you're going to want to use Intra, formerly Azure Active Directory, or some other kind of SSO, single sign-on option, so that you don't have to define your users over and over again. Being able to reference them and letting another product other than Unity Catalog validate the person's identity, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. For quality, you can always look at Informatica, Talend, some off-the-shelf solutions. Again, test, validate that they're good for you and will work in your environment. Or you can always roll your own data quality solution. More than a few times, Blueprint's been called in to help build something into an ETL pipeline to handle data quality problems automatically, set up business rules, set up data cleansing rules. So it's not out of the question that you may end up rolling your own there. And finally, if you're looking for control costs, to control costs, performance, and scaling problems in Databricks, I'm always going to tell you about Lakehouse Optimizer. It's our solution. We saw the problem fairly early on, a little over 2 years ago, that Databricks is great, but the cost can sometimes be a little hard to understand and to allocate. Well, how much of that $5,000 a month was spent in R&D? How much was spent for SQL warehouses? How much was spent for? So we started building Lakehouse Optimizer to start answering all those questions. And now it's really awesome. It puts everything you need right in front of your face. So you can see what you have, what you're spending, where you're spending. And it's even going to make some recommendations on how you could either get that process to run faster or cheaper, maybe a little bit of both. Cool. The next big challenge is going to be, of course, data migration or virtualization. So as you introduce Databricks into your environment, you've got all these other data sources like SQL Server and file servers and just you've got data all over the place. Making the call of how much of that you need to copy and integrate into Databricks versus how much of that could you just virtualize, read it in place, and still have all the analytics you want. Finding that balance for your company, it's a challenge to figure that out. This is where I'll start talking to you about workflows, Delta Live tables, maybe a hybrid approach. In some rare cases, maybe we're even talking about ADF or some external orchestration solution to moving data around. But how do you choose which one's right for you? You've got to define what you want, what you're willing to do to get it, and test, research, and just perform your proof of concepts. Next up, and honestly, I've seen different versions of this across all of my engagements. Uh, Skill gaps. If you're talking about bringing Databricks into an environment where no one's ever touched Spark, no one's ever touched Hadoop, no one's ever touched a lot of these languages, well, it's going to be pretty difficult to bring in Databricks. Yeah, you can get them started with Databricks SQL. If they're familiar with Transact SQL, Databricks SQL, it's not going to be a huge stretch. In my mind, it's a little bit closer to like MySQL because of the way it handles limits and paging. But even for a Transact SQL guy like myself, DB SQL is a great way to break in to Databricks. But the only real solution here is you're gonna have to invest in training. Yeah, it's in all caps because it is just that important. There is a ton to learn within the Databricks ecosystem. And you know, I've used Databricks now for 6, 7 years. I forget how long it's been. There's still a lot about Databricks that I'm not familiar with. I'm not the go-to person for ML and AI. I'm not, I'm not that kind of professional. I'm more an engineer. So when you have those questions about, how do I maintain control? How do I move data around? How do I optimize? Yeah, that's totally me. But there's always an opportunity to invest in training, whether that means just, giving your folks time to read and practice on their own, or it's formal training classes that you can send them off to, or online classes, or whatever. It's an investment. In my mind, it's far worse to not invest in training and your people leave when they learn a skill on their own versus, pay for training and they move on anyway. I mean, in the end, I'd rather invest in training to get more from the talent you have. And finally, the last challenge that I see, change management. Now, this is both development methods and organizational change. As soon as you start talking people having to change the way they do things, there's going to be that reluctance, that pushback. The only way we've seen that successful, define the goal. Where do you want to get to? What's the goal in the change? And take smaller steps, break it down, and iterate. You don't have to get the change management just right the first go round. You won't develop the right CI/CD pattern the very first time. You won't develop your processes for introducing change, for introducing new work. You're not going to get it right the first time. Just state what goals you have, take steps to get there, and always look for that chance to improve. Cool. All right. Any new questions come in yet?
No new questions. As a reminder for those attending, feel free to go ahead and add questions into the comment section, and Shannon will add that to his queue.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it. If you have any more follow-up questions about this, put them in the chat. Let me know. Okay, next question we got was, what are the best practices for aligning a data strategy with broader business goals, especially in a rapidly changing technology landscape? That was a mouthful. First and foremost, adopt an agile approach. You're not going to get there all in one go. If you spend months building out a plan from getting from point A to point B in the waterfall fashion, there's always unknown unknowns when you start. If you adopt an agile methodology, as you learn these new things, you can start taking that into consideration for the next sprint. So for the next improvement in your product, in your data product. So the biggest part of this, you want regular check-ins with your business stakeholders. Talk to the people who are going to be consuming this, who aren't your data engineers, who aren't your data scientists. Talk to accounting, talk to HR, talk to ops. Find out, what do they have today? What would they like? Why do they need certain things? If you can understand the business need behind something, it gets a lot easier to break that down into a solution. So I do want to caution you here. While I do say regular check-ins, try to keep it to 2 to a sprint. You want your business stakeholders coming in for sprint planning. That way they can bring to you a sense of business need for a given thing to be solved. And then during sprint demos, so you can show them, all right, based on what we committed to do this sprint, this is how much we got finished. Here's something for you to touch and feel and use today to show them the progress that you're making on a regular basis. Okay. In the Agile methodology, it's going to be important to choose a strong product owner, someone who can help balance multiple business groups all asking for data at the same time. If you're a data engineer, you know what I'm talking about. You've been hit with 3 requests at the same time. They're all top priority. It really doesn't work that way. Your product owner can help bring in the new requests, help get them into the backlog, help move them into current sprints in an orderly fashion without overwhelming your team. Really, that's their number one job. But also, you want a product owner who's going to be able to listen to these requests from multiple business groups and figure out, hey, you know what? Ops actually is using information from HR. And you see what HR needs of that data, you see what ops needs of that data, and combine these efforts. Instead of having to spin up a new data set for each and every request, if you have data sets that you can share across teams, you're going to get to value quicker. You're going to have consistency between your business orgs. You're going to get a ton of benefit from combining these efforts and go from there. Also, last point on bringing the business in on an agile approach, make sure your business users are bringing you requests. They're not coming in and telling you, I want you to build this in Power BI. I want you to build this in XYZ technology. The business has the problem. They're asking for a technology solution. The architect, the engineers, they're the ones who are going to take those requests and try to find the most effective solution to a given problem. If you rob them of that, you'll get what you ask for, but you may not get what you need. So, all right. Other points about Agile methodology, you can introduce bugs during the current sprint, but try at all costs to avoid injecting stories and features into the current sprint. It's okay to say, this is the next thing that's most important. And when you do your sprint planning for the next sprint, it's okay to bump the priority of that up towards the top. But if you keep injecting stories into the current sprint, it's really hard to say, well, when are we going to be done? Well, based on what we knew yesterday, we are going to be finished by next week. But then three new requests came in today into the current sprint. Now we're not sure when we'll be able to complete those 3 new ones plus all the other tasks that we agreed to solve. And following up on that, try to plan out at least 3 sprints ahead. So you're working on the current sprint. If you can get an idea of what you're going to be working on for the next 3 sprints, that's great. You can start road mapping, here's approximately where we're going to be in a month and a half or in 2 months. Now, I'm not saying that you have to lock these down 3 sprints out. You can lock them down each sprint planning session. You can lock down the next one and say, all right, we're now committing to this being our next sprint. Once it's locked, then you move on to the next sprint. Say this is 2 sprints out, 3 sprints out. My final point here on the Agile methodology, remember MVP is the minimally viable product. Don't make your test criteria or your user acceptance criteria, this must be perfect, because perfection is near impossible to attain. But does the solution meet the request that the business stated? Does it meet, does it work? Could it be prettier? Sure. Could it be could it run faster? Sure. But does it answer the business request? If yes, cool, ship it. Now, you can always add those improvements, desired improvements, to the backlog, or you can drop them into future sprints. But getting that minimally viable to answer the business question, get that out as quickly as you can, that's key. That way, you start gaining trust with the business that you're here for them, you're flexible, but you've committed to getting a certain job done. So a whole lot of talk about Agile and data projects there. Again, if you've got more questions about how do I adopt an Agile approach, definitely reach out. We should talk. There's a lot more to it than just this. But other than adopting an Agile methodology, I would say best practice for getting from where you are to where the business needs you to be, frameworks. Don't rebuild the wheel each time. Try to find a framework that gets you 80% of to the 80% point of where you want to be. If you have a framework that can help you automatically ingest all your data from source systems, something like a metadata-driven framework, start from there, then customize for the other 20%. If you start from that 80% mark, you're going to be able to show business value a lot quicker than if you're writing each and every piece of code from scratch by hand. The other thing is your development speed, it becomes more geometric and less linear. If you've got a framework that you can just add configs to over and over again, have your analysts add configs to your framework, and it adds more data automatically. And finally, stakeholder engagement and building their data literacy, it's key. You've got to keep your stakeholders involved. You've got to understand, both what they want, and you really want to get to that point where you can look past the request and see, all right, what's the need? What's the actual problem that we need to address? And then helping those business stakeholders, help them understand what data you do have, where it's located. And Unity Catalog is key, especially in Databricks, to helping build that data literacy, because not only can you list, what databases and schemas you have, catalogs and schemas you have, but you can also add tags. So you could tag tables. This has sales data. This has PII. This has operation data. You can also add descriptions, both to, or actually at every level. You can add descriptions to catalogs, schemas, tables, columns, all the way down. And with that data, that search bar at the top of your Databricks workspace, it becomes more and more powerful. Someone can type in, I'm looking for sales data by month. And they could literally type in sales data by month. And they're going to see tables and catalogs and schemas that contain that. They can click through and they'll be able to find their data more quickly that way. But helping them understand how to find their data and understanding what data you do have and understanding its validity and its value, that's data literacy. That's an ongoing conversation that you're going to have with your stakeholders. And those are my top best practices for working with the business to get them to value as quickly as possible. All right. Anyone bring in new questions yet?
No new questions yet, Shannon.
Okay.
And so again, folks, we've got about 30 more minutes, so be sure to submit questions if you've got them.
Cool. All right, let's go one more. All right, what is the number one thing you advise your clients to do in Databricks is read best practices or common patterns? I had a little fun with this one. Yes, I could do just one, but it was going to take me all day to decide which of the following was the one and only thing I wanted to share with you. So I actually ended up doing a top 10, kind of like Letterman used to do. So without any further ado, number 10, don't pay twice for the same task. So earlier, when I mentioned that I might suggest ADF or some other external orchestrator to control your process flows, be careful, because not only will you be paying the Databricks cost for whatever it is you're doing inside of Databricks, but your orchestrator will also have a cost on top of it. So in ADF's case, you're paying for ADF's runtime on top of your DBUs, on top of your Azure subscription. So you're paying probably not 3x, but you are paying more than once for a given task. Instead, if you can use Databricks workflows, Delta Live tables, or some other mechanism built into Databricks, it's going to reduce the cost of that task. So keep in mind all the costs. Number 9, set up maintenance routines. So this is becoming easier, and this is becoming more automated as you move into Unity Catalog. But think about the number of tables you've created in your environment that no one uses anymore. In a lot of cases, we're seeing up to half of a client's environment can be deprecated because no one uses it anymore. And the good news is when we're migrating those customers to Unity Catalog, we basically slash the work in half as soon as we mark all that stuff deprecated. But the downside is a lot of those tables have workflows associated with them. So you're paying compute to maintain a table that no one uses. So if you can set up maintenance routines to look for tables that aren't used anymore, maybe in the last 30, 60, 90 days, you can schedule those to, maybe you want to remove permissions from it. You don't want to remove the table just yet, but you want to remove permissions from it to make sure that no one's actually using that data. And if no one screams, yeah, maybe some point down the line, you want to automatically archive those tables. That way you could restore it if you need to. You could turn the jobs back on if you need to. But in the short term, you're saving cost. You're saving storage space. You're saving money. This is more for my devs out there. When you build that shiny new widget, whether it's a notebook, whether it's Python code, whatever, when you're testing, test more than the golden path. So if you expect a data set every time and you expect certain things to happen, great. Test the positive path or the golden path. Test that. But also throw some data at it that should break it, like empty data sets. Throw an empty data set at your code. Put some kind of try catch to handle it to where it doesn't just blow up and stop your process, but it will let you know, okay, I can react to this new case. It can log it, it can handle it, a little more gracefully than just blowing up. There we go. Number 7, implement data quality checks. I'll be honest, this is usually one of the last things that we discuss, or not really discuss. It's one of the last things we usually implement in a data pipeline. Generally, we're more concerned with where's the source, where do we need to land it, how do we get it there. What you also want to start doing as early as possible is defining what is good data quality. If you've got sales coming in a file and a sale is missing a sale date, well, what should we do in that case? Is that a valid sale? Or if you've got some file coming in that has dates, and normally it's year, month, day, but for some columns you get month, day, year. Well, which one's right? Which one should you correct it to? So if you can implement a lot of these into your pipeline as you're developing your data movement and your integration, as data moves to that silver and gold layer, you can assert higher validity to your data. You can assert that this data is clean, it's gone through these checks, these things have been fixed. It allows you to gain more trust with your business users if you start implementing your data quality checks early in your pipeline processes. Adopt a tribal approach for your UC, your Unity catalog descriptions and tags. So as you're building out these pipelines, that's going to start landing data in Unity catalog for different users, you as a data engineer may not understand the business meaning of each and every one of those columns, but the group you built it for does. If they're allowed access to tag and to describe data, they can help fill in some of these gaps. And that way, instead of having it all on one data stewardship group, you can now spread that work out across multiple business groups. You'll get um, deeper insight than just having a single team try to collect all that description and tags for you. Number 5, adopt CI/CD practices. Now, I want to point out, like I said before, you're not going to get this right the first time. I've never seen it happen right. Just out of the gate, get it right the first time. Decide, well, what do we want to get out of this process, this continuous integration, continuous development process? Do we want to be able to separate people's rights in dev from prod? Yeah, you probably do. Do you want a reliable way of getting code pushed out so that your developers can't accidentally introduce changes in a prod? Yeah, probably. That's probably a good one. But define those requirements and come up with some process that helps you implement those. I don't care if it's Azure DevOps, if it's GitHub or Git space, Git the Git version of ADO, I forget what it's called. Just decide what you want to get out of it first version. You could always aim for improvements down the line, but just start somewhere. Even if it's just starting with, hey, we're going to start version controlling the code. If that's all you get out of your first CI/CD pass, go for it. You can always improve. You can always get better at what you do. Number 4, don't reinvent the wheel. Probably heard this on the last slide. Whenever you're getting started, try to find a framework that's going to get you most of the way towards your goal. If you've got more than one developer in your data engineering team, which almost all of you do, make sure they're talking to each other. The problems that you're solving today, they aren't new, they aren't unique. They may be a unique combination of things that you've done before, but data engineers, come on. All we do is move data from point A to point B and change it from form C to form D. That's it. Now, tons of ways to do all that, but the point is here, start from a framework, start from a shared framework, shared code. That way, you know the quality of your program is that much higher rather than bespoke. You don't have to worry about, did every single person that created a function to do X did it the same way? Will it result in the same thing every single time? If you're sharing code and starting from frameworks, those questions just kind of go away. You've tested it once, you've proven that function works, reuse it again and again and again. Number 3, call it a shameless plug or not, get Lakehouse Optimizer. If you're going to run Databricks in any environment, you need to get a handle around how you're spending your money. How is it mostly jobs? Is it mostly ad hoc? Are your job clusters set up properly? Have you over provisioned? Have you set them to run with 10 worker nodes and it turns out your code only runs on the driver node? That would be an expensive mistake. Install LHO, go through the training, understand what it shows you, use it. Make it a part of your development practices. If you build a new process and run it in dev, as long as you've got similar data volume, look at what LHO tells you about your new job and use that for your prod deployment. Use that to tell you what kind of nodes, how many nodes. Should you turn on scaling or should you fix the nodes? Should you go serverless? Test it in dev, validate it in prod, and don't be stuck with a single config. It may turn out that over time that job needs to change from 4 nodes to 5 nodes, or maybe it changed from a fixed number of nodes to a variable number of nodes. Just look at what LHO tells you about your processes and take advantage of that. Number 2, I'm sure you've heard this one before, frameworks. Again, this is kind of like don't reinvent the wheel, where don't reinvent the wheel, I really want you to concentrate on within your team, don't develop the same solution twice. Frameworks, it's about adopt a framework, make sure everyone agrees, or not everyone, make sure you all come to an agreement on how that framework is used for your business. Use it. It just makes life so much easier. And finally, training. My number one best practice is always training. Learn as much as you can, take classes, read, attend webinars like these, share what you learned with your colleagues, learn from each other. Training is never done. I mean, just like the Databricks product itself, it's never done. We're getting new features all the time. There's always more to learn. Be comfortable with what you know, but try to grow every single day. That's my number one best practice. All right.
Awesome.
Come on, tell me someone asked a question.
Yeah, we got one here. This is from Varun. Hi, Shannon. What's your opinion over choosing autoloader instead of Delta live tables for data ingestion and implementing medallion architecture? Also, which one do you suggest?
Okay. Let's break this down. There's a couple questions here. So autoloader versus Delta live tables. Number one, test it. DLT, for several workloads that I've tested, it actually turns out to be a more expensive solution. Autoloader, if you're dealing directly with raw files, try autoloader first, see how that works. Try Delta live tables. Whichever one's most cost effective and can handle the volume of data you're throwing at it each day, that's probably going to be your better solution. I will say that our MDF that I usually use, it does handle most of the file types that you're going to see coming in raw: text, JSON, tab, comma separated, and that. Generally, that's the most performant. But if you don't have one of those, try autoloader first. Now, implementing medallion architecture. Oh boy, where should I start? Start with raw. Let's consider your raw data to be SQL Server or source files from some system or an API. It's okay to read that data in and not persist it. I mean, as long as in your bronze layer you do persist that data in as near to the originating schema as possible, except as a Delta table. So let me say that again, because there's a lot there. If you can take a CSV and store it as a Delta table, and it's all the original data, persisting it just in bronze is just fine. I have seen places where they want to persist raw as well. I'm not going to argue against it. It's extra storage. In bronze, all of that should be, like I said, as close to the originating schema as you can. If you do any data cleansing, any merging of data, joining of data, that goes into silver. You could split it and call it two different things, but really that's your silver. As you move up these medallions, what you're saying is this data is now more valuable. It's more valid. It's more trustworthy as you move up the scale. My gold layers, I do put both transaction level data and aggregate level data in gold. The reason I do that is I want my data scientists to be able to have the highest volume, the most transactional nature of that data that they want. But I don't want them reaching into my silver layer because I want to reserve the right to make changes to the silver layer that aren't going to break my data scientist consumption or my report consumption. That's my number one reason for trying to keep people out of bronze and silver, is that's the data engineer's domain. Gold is where the consumer should go. All right, Varun, I think that's all your questions.
And Shannon, we have 3 more. Let me see how I can put this on the board here for us. So from Christian, What is the best way to connect and read data from an on-prem SQL Server instance under the latest LTS? We've used a Spark JDBC connector from Maven in the past, but this connector doesn't work under the latest LTS.
Okay. One, are you paying for that connector? If so, no need. Most of the time, I'm just using a generic JDBC connector in my Python code to make the connection, to make that connection to your SQL Server. And if it is SQL Server and it is accessible from Databricks, if it's going to be one of your raw tables, you can actually set that up as an external catalog. So for each database in your SQL Server you want to be able to read from, you can actually set that up as an external table. Just make sure you lock out any end users from being able to hit that external catalog. Yeah, make sure that it's just devs or maybe just your service principals. All right.
Awesome.
Let's see.
Got another one if you're ready.
Yep.
All right, we're going to put this here from Peter. Do you recommend ever using Databricks file arrival triggers? They have weak support, don't pass the file names as parameters, have limits on the number of files in the storage account, but we haven't found a good alternative for real-time file ingestion.
Autoloader gets you kind of close. Again, yeah, it's not all the way. I usually come back with the question, do you necessarily have to have it processed the exact second that file finishes it right? Or could you just get really close? Could you keep track of the files that you've read and then, or keep track of the last update date and then list files that have come in since then? Is that possible? But if not, the best, I won't even call it the best, but my best pass at that was an Azure function that had a file trigger on the ADLS account, and I had it calling an API endpoint in Databricks to do something. In this case, it was calling the jobs run endpoint. Not great, but yeah, that's a good one. Hey, if you come up with something better, let me know. I'd be interested in how you tackle that.
Awesome. And then one more that came through from Sunithi. How do we save Excel using PySpark? In other words, is it possible to save an Excel in Databricks without converting to pandas?
Not that I found. So I use Excel Pi. I'll look it up. I'll try to get this answer to you. But there's a Pi library I use. But I did notice that it only accepts pandas data frames in, which means you're going to be stuck on your driver node. I know why you're writing to Excel too. It's for a business requirement, right? Yeah, probably. You know, I'll be honest, I haven't found a great solution here either. Ooh, what if you set up a data connector from your Excel to a SQL warehouse endpoint that points to that data? Then they're pulling that data when they need it. Could that work for you?
And just a reminder for attendees, while we can't hear your audio or you can't submit that way, feel free to continue to add into comments. I see that, and I can always share that with Shannon here live.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, you guys. Keep sending them in if you've got them.
Yes, please. All right, while we wait for another question, I do have one more. Oh, there we go. Let's get back full screen. The question came in, how do you get DataGrip to connect to Databricks? I'll be honest, I haven't used DataGrip, but I did look through their documentation. It looks like they support a JDBC connection. So I did something similar in Visual Studio Code. So what you'd need to make that connection is the host, which is the beginning part of your URL for your workspace. The path, you can also get that from the warehouse detail screen. And then you're going to need a personal access token, at least in Visual Studio Code, you needed a personal access token. So long as your admins haven't locked you out of that ability, click on your user icon in the upper right of the workspace, go to settings. When that page loads, look under developer, and you'll be able to create a token and set a lifespan to it. You will notice, in this case, I had to choose a specific catalog. This one wouldn't let me connect to all catalogs, but I have seen some connectors like this where you don't define a catalog and it gives you access to all of the catalogs that you have ACLs to. So hopefully that gets you started.
All right, we got another question here for you, Shannon.
Awesome.
Do you suggest a landing zone before the bronze layer where we can keep the raw data as is, or do you suggest just keeping everything in the raw layer and creating delta tables?
So most of the time I'm not a proponent of keeping the raw data. It's just extra storage. Besides, your bronze layer should be as close to that original schema as possible, no data transformations, no data cleansing, just as close to that source schema as you can get. But that's your historical record of everything that's come in. So if any of your downstream processes fail or your downstream consumer tables get deleted and you have to reprocess, you should be able to go back to your bronze and reload any of your silver and gold tables. Now, if you've got a situation where your files are transient, they're created, but they're destroyed on a regular basis, and there's a chance that you can't structure your bronze in a way that keeps track of what's coming in each time. Okay, now you're starting to argue for a raw zone before the bronze. But most of the time, you're going to hear me try to come up with a solution that starts with bronze and ends with gold. And another point, bronze and up, I do like to see all Delta Live tables, no external tables on top of CSV, JSON. It's a performance thing. While it's great for your raw to bronze, I'm willing to pay the penalty once. I don't want to pay that penalty for each subsequent layer. I think that's everything.
That's great. And the last question we got is, how is AI making inroads in Databricks?
From a personal point of view, if you look at my my development environment, most of the time you will see Visual Studio Code. Oops. And you'll also notice, okay, you notice this little guy up here? Throughout the day, if I know I want to stub out a certain function or a certain functionality, a lot of times I'll go in here and I'll write a little pseudocode and then hit the button to copy it into the notebook. And you can't see it right now, but I am connected to where I can run that command against my Databricks cluster. So it's making huge inroads and it's making me a lot more effective at writing code. Is it right every time? No, but it gets me 80, 90% of the way to what I need. And then I spend a few seconds just cleaning up. No, to me, this is the greatest thing ever about Databricks and AI. But there's other ways that it's coming in. The search functionality that's built into your workspace, that's getting smarter. The ability to ask plain English questions about your data, that's getting better. Look in our archive, Nick Carpenter and I think it was Christian did a whole hour about I forgot the AI, the AI BI option to where you can set up models on top of your data. They did a whole hour on it. Check that out. In the end, it's not 100% of the way there, but it's a good start. Was their discovery. Those are the top two, but there's always more. Genie, thanks, Nick. Yeah, Genie. He did a whole hour on, or they did a whole hour on Genie. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up here, folks? I just put a link to the webinar that Shannon was referring to with Nick and Christian, so you guys can have access to that one. If not, hey guys, we love being part of this Databricks community. Shannon, thank you so much for availing yourself for this hour. If you have more questions, or perhaps you don't have a partner that is working with your organization around Databricks, we would love to be your trusted partner. We have a Databricks Center of Excellence on our website on bpcs.com. You can navigate to our Databricks section and you can find a full list of resources from past webinars, upcoming webinars, as well as the solutions and offerings that we have productized just to make it that much easier for you. I see one question that came in just now, so I'll give that to you, Shannon, and then we'll wrap up after that. Christian says, for foreign catalogs, should I be worried about any resource limits, importing tables with millions of rows, for example?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You need to be familiar with resource limits, but not from the Databricks side. I have seen SQL servers that had years and years and years of data, and someone effectively tries to ingest select star from table every single day. It just crushes the SQL server. Instead, come up with some mechanism. If maybe your SQL server doesn't have change CDC enabled, and maybe you can't enable CDC, come up with a solution on your side that'll help you pull as little data as possible each pull. That's why you also heard me earlier mention, if you set up an external catalog, make sure only your devs and only your managed service principal, or your service principal, your managed service instance, has access to it. You don't want just anyone going in there and querying data, because yeah, the costs are going to be a lot higher than you think they are. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. And thanks again, folks, for joining. Keep an eye on our event page. We're active on LinkedIn, also on our website. You can always find under our event section upcoming webinars. Again, we love being part of this community. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Thanks again, Shannon.
See ya.
Bye, guys.